Yep.
All right, so I'm showing 11 o'clock, so I think we will get started. I want to welcome everyone to the Social Security Advisory Board's IT Systems Expert Panel webinar. My name is Kim Hildred, and I chair the Social Security Advisory Board. The board and I are happy to have you here with us with our esteemed system panelists, and we are eager to hear about their important work. The board commissioned the IT Systems Expert Panel in 2019 as an independent panel to review the Social Security Administration's IT modernization plan. Initially released in October 2017, the estimated cost of Social Security's 5-year modernization plan was then $677 million. Recent estimates revised the figures upwards to $691 million. Modernizing Social Security's IT systems is essential to delivering more effective, secure services to the public. Our panel chair, Dr. Alan Balutis, and the panel of distinguished and experienced experts completed a detailed examination of the IT modernization plan, including stakeholder interviews with representatives from state and federal agencies, advocacy groups, and systems end users. As part of its assessment, the panel also consulted with Social Security executives and employees to learn about modernization progress and share insights and guidance to help the agency achieve its goals. The panel report includes recommendations for Social Security in 4 key areas: operating model, governance infrastructure, IT modernization strategy, and customer experience. And for those of you who may not know, you can find their report on our website. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to our systems panel chair, Alan Balutis.
And thank you, Kim, and thank you. The lighting at your home gives you an angelic look on the screen. So thank you to you and the board for commissioning this panel. My thanks to all of the panel members who agreed to serve and have given us and the agency the benefit of their insights and advice. I want to thank all of the participants. We had well over 100 registered to attend. We're close to that number, as I see, in terms of those who have joined so far. So we have an hour and a half. We're going to make this largely interactive and turn to your questions. But to do a little stage setting, I want to do the quickest of overviews of our main findings and recommendations. I will try to operate in the same Germanic efficiency that the board chair exhibited in starting the meeting on time. So we'll go through the major sections of the report in 4 or 5 minutes. And let me first call upon Rennie DiPentina and Mark Foreman for a quick overview on the business strategy aspects of the report. Rennie, please begin.
Yes, I'll take a minute and turn the rest of my time over to Mark. Basically, the report is built around the concept of let's know what we're building as we're building it. Let's have a vision and operating model in mind of what it is that we're building so that we can relate architectures, plans, and activities that may look like individual activities going on to the broader picture of what we are implementing. If we don't do that, we'll build something and then convince ourselves that's what we meant to build. So the report is based on the concept that SSA should adopt an operating model, provide a roadmap of where they're going. Our recommendation is that since Social Security is a social insurance program, there's much to be learned from the insurance industry and the modernization that they've done in terms of benchmarking and learning how to address the more modern technologies and incorporate them within the businesses. So it's the roadmap. We begin this discussion by saying, let's have a specific roadmap that we're building against. Mark, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rennie. Hello, everybody. I think it's important to understand this concept of an operating model is really a definition of how an organization uses its resources. And we often hear this as how people, processes, and technology come together to fulfill the needs of its customers. That's the basic definition of an operating model. The reason that we think it's important for SSA is because the question of whether the modernization is simply an ad hoc accumulation of various initiatives, or are the initiatives evaluated and implemented against a vision of what SSA wants in terms of how they do business and serving their customers, interacting with other government agencies, and interacting with agents. So this operating model concept really is an organizing principle for how you use IT in line with your policy, your resources, your processes, and all those decisions have to come together. IT is not independent of these ideas. So a couple other examples that we talked about. Rennie mentioned insurance as kind of the basic one, but you could look at pension funds, you could look at wealth management, and you can see in all those industries, technology's had a profound effect on their operating model. And generally, it involves both improving customer value and reducing administrative costs. So it's not an either or. These two things generally, when you look at the companies and the way they've leveraged technology, impacts the operating model, both on the customer side and the administrative cost side. Now, one of the key things that we believe needs to be looked at is how the operating model uses technology to interact with the key customer segments. So you think of those in terms of beneficiaries, but for many people, especially with the demographic changes affecting Social Security, that relates to family members, agents, which could be lawyers or other types of agents, and other government agencies at the state and federal level. So for example, does SSA develop its own unique form that's filled out like a rubrics cube of medical appointments, or can it leverage health data and decision algorithms to simplify the process? When considering potential business model, we believe that the IT modernization plan needs to be adapted to whether SSA wants to operate like the insurance company, the pension plan, the wealth management company, an integrated partner with other government agencies and social services benefits, or as a public utility. They're drastically different models, and you get that different IT out of that. So with SSA founded as a social insurance program, as Rennie mentioned, we believe that the insurance company operating model most parallels the SSA business. The key example would be the application process to file for benefits, and the record maintenance processes is strongly similar in insurance companies and the way they've put together their modernization. So we put forward seven recommendations, and let me summarize those. First one is, sorry?
Very quickly, please.
Yeah, aligning with the agency's strategic vision and strategic plan, simplifying, streamline, and making interactions more responsive to the key stakeholders. And those could be claimants and beneficiaries. It could be beneficiary agents and other agencies at federal, state, and local levels of government. And then finally, identifying and include critical business lines within the operating model and address those, including customer journeys within and across the business lines.
Thank you, Mark. Let's turn to the next.
Alan, I believe you're frozen.
Dave McClure,
Yeah, you're better now. You had frozen for a few moments.
right, I saw that. Is Dave on? I know he was,
I'm on.
all right, Dave, please.
Yeah. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for having us here to discuss the report. Dan Chennick and I co-authored the part of the report dealing with the actual IT modernization strategy. As we know, IT modernization strategies in the government can sometimes become paper exercises. And one of the things we're looking for in our evaluation is the content and the use of the modernization strategy to really make a difference in how SSA was approaching its modernization. And really, the modernization strategy itself should be a very crisp, succinct discussion of the what and the how related to modernization. And we didn't find that connection, quite honestly, between the agency mission plan, strategic business plan, and the strategic IT plan. Most of the plan that was put together by SSA focused on problem solving the as is rather than really focusing on broad goals for the future and specific metrics on how to get there. So we found that to be a limitation in terms of the modernization plan. There's about 5 key findings that we have related to the strategy. I'll summarize them real quickly. The IT modernization strategy, in our opinion, lacks real relevant metrics for success for modernization, a key omission, I think, in the plan. The funding and acquisition approach is not very well laid out in terms of how SSA will approach moving off of legacy to modernized cloud platforms, for example. Third, while there's a lot of attention to automation or RPA, AI, and SSA is moving aggressively forward in some of these areas, there wasn't much discussion about data usage and how data is key to making these activities successful. So we'd like to see more discussion around the data domain of the strategy. Fourth, we found the engagement of internal and external stakeholders in developing the plan to be relatively limited. So it would seem to be more of an IT shop operation rather than an engagement with the entire agency on what the modernization is going to achieve. And fifth, our fifth finding related to architecture. There's a discussion of systems architecture, but there still wasn't a clear focus on the evidence required to show how moving in an architectural fashion to a new operating model would take place. There's other parts of this section that deal with key questions that we expect modernization strategies to address. There were hit or miss in terms of how well the plan did that. I'll leave that to people for the reading of the report, specifically what those issues were. But our recommendations are in five clear areas. We think we need that the strategic plan should align with the operating model, which has been discussed, the governance infrastructure, and the agency overall modernization plan. Our second recommendation is that there should be metrics in the plan against which progress could be measured. In many instances, those measures that are in place now are very broad and not very specific in terms of outcomes. Third, we thought that there should be a clear governance approach and a cross-agency stakeholder approach to the construction and the execution of the plan, and that needs some more work as well. And lastly, we thought a stakeholder engagement process should be in place for the modernization, and then it would help align external and internal stakeholders to put support behind, again, construction, the progress, and the outcomes associated with the modernization itself. Dan, anything to add real quick?
No, Dave, I thought you did a terrific job summing up. Thank you.
Cool.
Yes.
Al, back to you.
All right, thank you both, Dave and Dan. Jim Williams and Greg Giddens authored the next section of the report. I believe Jim is going to give the overview. Is that the case, Jim?
Yes.
And again, it was an honor to serve with this panel, and hopefully we're doing things that will help SSA. Looking at what we've been talking about, I think you'll hear some things being repeated. I mean, where Rennie and Mark started with, you need an operating model modernization concept, the 2B. And then we looked at what is the how do you get there? And we were looking for what is that governance infrastructure? Where is the program management processes, not just in the IT organization, but looking this as the 2B. This is a very complex modernization challenge, and looking for how are you going to get there? What we did see, looking at things like the capability and maturity model, outstanding people, the people who talk to us, the people like the CIO, Sean Brune, Kim Baldwin Sparks, Grace Kim, Nancy Berryhill, Sylvia and Halden, all incredibly dedicated, smart people who actually seem to work well together on what seemed like a collection of IT projects. But I think when you look at this going from a as is to a 2B, you're talking about a whole lot of gears of change. As Mark talked about, people, policy, process, technology, all of that has to move in sync. And all of that should be, in our opinion, driven by modernization by the chief business officer or somebody driving the IT, driving the business side, driving all of that to make sure it works together. And trying to understand how this works together, particularly as SSA is moving and is doing agile development, where you're doing short sprints, things are moving very fast. And sometimes that particular gear, where they're developing a sprint, they don't develop all the functionality, whereas the people on the business side might have been counting on that functionality. And if things move to the right, with those kind of gears of change and all those different things going on, we were looking for disciplined program management processes. How do you make decisions? But also, as Dave McClure said, how do you communicate on a continuous basis what's going on? And I think we really didn't see what we were looking for, which was tell us how you're going to get there, how you are going to have all of this work together from disciplined program management processes. So again, we're trying to help, but our recommendations really fall along the lines as an integrated part of the other 4 recommendations, taking from that operating model concept, taking from the IT strategy, linked to the customer experience, which I know Martha will talk about more. Is really how do you have a well-defined governance infrastructure that talks about this from an entire organization, not just from an IT standpoint? How do you clearly define those program management processes, align them with your decision-making approval processes, align them with Agile, and align them to your communication strategies, the stakeholder engagement? And then making sure, again, as this is not just an IT challenge, it is a modernization challenge, having the chief business officer drive those processes, drive them so they work in sync with the CIO. And then lastly, and I know Martha will talk about this more, is making sure the customer experience, the customer journeys are part of all of these processes, not just, buried into a short sprint or something like that. But let me turn to Greg for him to offer any additional comments he'd like.
Jim, as usual, you did a great job kind of covering the report. I just want to touch on one thing that you mentioned a couple of times, and that's synchronization. This kind of change, it touches broad areas across organizations and almost touches every corner. And sometimes governance can have a pejorative sense to it, but that's really not the intent of what we're talking about. We're talking about a structure to put in place that helps enable success and helps bring in all the right stakeholders and all the right activities and put those in a manner you can sync those up, understand the interdependencies, and be successful as the collective organization.
Well, again, that linking everything in sync was what was important to us, but let me turn it over to Martha and Nani.
Thanks, Jim. As Jim mentioned, I was the author of the customer experience section, and the operating model, IT modernization, governance, all of this really leads to the bottom line of how does SSA deliver services to the beneficiaries and the citizens of this country. And so when you think about customer experience, it's really not just about technology, although it's a great enabler. It's about the people and the process, and looking at the experience and the future experience that SSA should be providing to beneficiaries, including, we looked at omni-channel, which means that a citizen can interact with the organization via their channel of choice and not have to start over, which means that you can, your information follows each of those channels, as we do in our everyday life in most everything that we interact with. Given the situation that we're in today with COVID, we found end-to-end digital experience to be important. However, citizens need to be able to get their information handled regardless of the channel that they choose, as I mentioned. And even in today, I think people feel more comfortable talking to somebody sometimes when they're in a vulnerable place and they're looking at lifetime benefits for their lifetime that they need to make decisions about. Private and secure transactions. So we all want our information to be secure and private, and then personalized. So we made a lot of recommendations around the overall kind of life cycle of a customer experience, and some of them are kind of infused in some of the other recommendations that you heard. But understanding your customers, SSA's customers are different than the federal student aid customers. So really understanding the people that you're dealing with and the what matters most to them. Having a governance structure that looks at how you make decisions around that impact customers, and how do you drive, prioritize investments that impact citizens and beneficiaries, that how they're prioritized. Then we talked a lot about strategy, and there's all kinds of strategies that we've talked about in terms of modernization strategies. When you look at a customer strategy, and it needs to be, aspirational and inspirational around that experience that you want to be providing in the future, that will drive the future implementation of technology. But you need to understand what that current experience is, how to close the gap between the current experience and the future, and then understand what that current end-to-end journey is, not just looking at each touch point by touch point, but looking at the journey from when you need information about your benefits through actually signing up and beyond, because everybody needs some ongoing interaction. All of this can be driven through real customer experience feedback, which, real-time feedback provides a lot of insights to be able to take actions as they go forward. We made some recommendations around having an organization or a position, chief customer officer, within the agency at a senior level that's focused on the beneficiary and the experience that they're having. They could bring all the data together to look at that customer beneficiary experience and really align the agency on the values, the customer values that they have. This should be both internal and external. Program officials can't really do their job without having good IT, HR, contracting, and that kind of fits into all of our contracting program management recommendations. And they need to support the creation of this strategy that I mentioned. So I think that's about it high level in terms of what we think would improve the ability to focus on the experience that the beneficiaries are having when they interact with SSA. Bonnie?
Thanks. I'm the closer, so I'm gonna wrap up a little bit, and then we'll turn to questions and answers. And I'm happy to see Alan back, our fearless leader. So I put a little section at the end here, and it sort of wraps in, folds in everything you've heard from all of these really amazing panelists, which is, you really don't just talk about IT modernization as technology alone. You need to nest it in a strategy that includes stakeholder engagement and operating model and governance. And the example I provided was taking on a big goal, which was ending veterans homelessness, which we took on some years ago. And it was a big, hairy, difficult goal across HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and Veterans Administration. And in order to create an enabling environment to do this, it really picks up everything these panelists have said today and our report says, which is communicate with your stakeholders and actually learn from your stakeholders to create your strategy, pick an operating model, pick a governance model that actually includes all parts of the agency, not just technology, not just the business parts, but all parts that can help your difficult project succeed, and create metrics and relentlessly track towards them, not just for the sake of tracking, but actually for the sake of communicating out to all parts of the agency and to all stakeholders about your plan and your progress. Doing IT modernization, as you probably know, is one of the most difficult things to do in any federal agency because it is so core to your operations, but it is about so much more than your operations. And it can really be and should be a part of how people think about the modernized way in which we deliver services. And there's a lot of opportunity here at Social Security Agency to improve, but it will take all parts of the agency to really make that happen. So that's my closing argument. And I'll hand the microphone back to Alan.
All right, thank you. Kim, I know you're reviewing and fielding the questions, but I saw two come forward initially. Is it okay with you if I turn to those right now? Kim?
Sorry, I was on mute. Sure thing. Go right ahead, Alan.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go to these in the order in which I received, and thank you. Is it Akanelia? I'm mispronouncing the name, but so I apologize. But thank you for getting us started. And I'm going to turn perhaps to Mark and Dan to respond to this. The first question was, how did you align systems architecture, which is technical in nature, to the other two tenets of the operating models of people and process? Dan, could I start with you on this, and then let Mark contribute if he has some other ideas?
Yes, and I would say that excellent question. Thank you for that, and again, thanks to all the panelists for their terrific remarks. I would say that from an architectural perspective, architecture involves multiple dimensions. The infrastructure and the applications are pieces of the architecture. So is the data that Dave talked about, as are the sort of business processes. And if you think back to sort of a full stack up architectural framework, each layer kind of nests and grows from the other. So as you think about setting up the systems architecture, and when Dave and I thought about this in terms of linking the architecture to the modernization plan, it was sort of drawing that link so that you understand what are the systems that are being today operationalized, how are they being modernized? How does that affect the applications that are delivering services to people? How does that affect the work processes of the employees and contractors who are delivering those applications? And then ultimately, tying into Martha's point, how does that affect the delivery of services and how the customers interact? So that you can draw a line directly from the architectural framework at a technical level to the delivery of services to customers. Mark, would you add anything to that?
Now, that was a really great summary, Dan. I just add that we kind of had the easy job. We didn't have to do the architecture. We had to comment and provide insights and recommendations for Social Security Administration on what they ought to focus on. And I think Dan laid out very well the types of things that we were asking them to look at.
Thank you to both of you. Next question, I'm going to address.
Could I add something to that question?
Absolutely, Jim.
Yeah, when we were talking to the different groups at SSA, and we asked about a business reference architecture, I think the answer was somewhat like the customer experience. That's a good idea. That's something we're starting to do. And I think as we've talked about having that operating model modernization concept, that then leads to a technical and a business reference architecture, and the business reference architecture being owned by the chief business officer, and making sure there's an as is, to be, and it's all moving in sync, and looking at with your program management processes, whether each individual project or sprint then quickly updates stakeholders and quickly updates the business and the technical architecture is very important. And I don't think we heard all of that. So that's all I have to add.
All right, thank you, Jim. Let's turn to the next question. It's from Mary Keller. And I'm going to ask Martha Doris to address this. The question, did you find that customer experience wasn't already being considered within the new Chief Business Office?
Thanks, Alan. I think that the organization has been addressing customer service for a long time. Even today, that's the model that they're talking about. So yeah, there's a lot of words around customer service across the agency, but I don't think that they really had every piece in place to be able to truly look at the end-to-end customer journey and address customer experience.
Alan, if I could, to add a little bit to Martha's answer, she said there was some focus on this, but we just didn't get the sense that there was the big investment to really go out and engage with customers, both those that are using the systems, external to SSA, and engaging with them, as well as the internal employees that are using the systems to provide services to citizens. It takes an investment. It takes time and energy to really go out and ask and meet and look and understand their journey and how they're interfacing with the systems and what they need from them.
Yeah, I also think, Greg, just to add to that, you really have to understand what the current experience is that you're providing to the customers. And there was really no consistent way of feedback across the organization that they had, any of that in place.
Yeah, that's a
Tom,
great.
if you don't mind, one other thing, just, we listened to different states about the disability case processing system. And I think that's a unique case where the implementation, a lot of it is done with people working in the state governments, not for the federal government. And as Martha and Greg have talked about the customer experience and the employee experience, you've also got people in the field who are actually state government employees that need to be listened to as well. And
Yeah.
I think these one more thing, the DCPS systems seem to be going well, but a bit of a one-off from the rest of the activities of modernization within SSA. And all of that should be driven by the same operating model, the same looking at customer journeys, and the same program management processes.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think everybody's comments are right on. One other thing to be crystal clear that we didn't see was a human-centric approach to that engagement with the stakeholders internally and externally. It's more than just having conversation. It's actually going through an agile sprint-driven process. It's very well laid out and used now consistently across as a best practice across companies and government agencies. And we didn't see that engagement being run that way. It was more of just a conversation. Thank you very much, and then go back to writing the plan or running projects.
Well, Mary has a quick follow-up, which I would ask that we get only one or two panel members to respond to, as opposed to the full array. And again, I'm going to turn to our CX expert, Martha. Do you recommend that SSA also take into account consumer behavior data outside of SSA's own survey and metrics tracking? And we've already seen some positive steps in this direction, but Martha, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that as you're planning for both your current and your future experience, you need to take into account how your customer base is operating in their personal life and in their consumer space. So I do think that gives you good trend data on how people want to interact and how they're currently interacting with other organizations. And as we talked about the operating model, how are they operating with those kinds of organizations, whether it's, insurance companies, banks, or other institutions, and use that as a measure for, or ideas on how to move forward.
We have a, I think I recall this name from my checkered past, Dr. Henry Aaron. It sounds so familiar, who just recently left as a member of the board. So Dr. Aaron asked, did the panel receive all the cooperation from SSA that you sought and needed to do your work? And I would answer that with a resounding yes. And I think the panel members have all touched on this to some extent in their answers. I had the opportunity to meet early on with the commissioner and deputy commissioner, with the senior advisors, with the then CIO, Rajiv Mather, from top to bottom, from the commissioner through Kim Baldwin Sparks to the leads on the business side, to Sean Brune, who has moved into the role that Rajiv recently left, down through the field and district offices. The agency was very responsive, and we tried to call out in the report all the cooperation they had given us and the insights they had provided. It made a big difference. I see a question here also from Jason Miller. I'm not sure if it's the Jason Miller who was the spokesman for the Trump administration and recently left, or the Jason Miller that will be joining OMB as the new Deputy Director for Management, if confirmed from that position. But it's so pointed, it must be Jason Scoop Miller from Federal News Radio. What is the advisory board's plan to socialize, continue to support, and make sure the report is more than just shelfware? There seems to be a lot of good information here, but hard to know where to start. So I'm going to kick that question up to the powerful chair of the board, Kim Hildred, to respond to.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. I will say that the board actually just before this session spent time with the panel discussing those very same questions. So we've obviously just have received the report. We've spent some time with the panel, and actually very quickly the board will be turning to take a look at our goals in this area and what are the best ways to achieve those goals. So I would say the best answer I can give you at this point is stay tuned, but certainly these are critically important questions. The report is extremely important. The board has been very focused on not only IT, but service delivery. And so I expect that we'll have much more to say about our follow-up very shortly.
All right, thank you, Kim. They have a question from Scott Brzezinski, and I'm not quite sure if we can address this, but we'll certainly try. The question is, how does SSA determine which workloads, mission apps, are running in the public cloud versus running within the SSA's computer center? Rennie, I know your experience there is from previous, but I know you also maintain good contacts. Might I start with you and see if you could address this? And if any other member of the panel wish to jump in after your response, please do so.
I'll be happy to start, and I think people like Dan can also add to this because of his experience with the IBM Cloud. I think what our colleagues at SSA would be looking at, first of all, is triaging those applications and that data, which is essential for them to do business. And that kind of data can go out to a private cloud, because you want, if you have any concerns about the security and the access of that data and those applications. Public clouds might be a good place for our SSA colleagues to have applications running that provide self-help services to the client. I think that they will have gone through that type of thought process in deciding what to keep in the new National Computer Center versus what to put out. And you specifically said a public cloud. The things going out to public cloud, in my opinion, have to be one in which you are not taking large security risks with your data and with your applications. Dan, this is an area that IBM is well into. You may want to add to where I'm going.
Well, Rennie, I thought that was a terrific answer, and I would only add that a hybrid approach, for SSA, as for so much of the government and so much of the economy, is the direction that a lot of organizations are moving toward, because it really depends on the workload, the level of risk and speed that are necessary for modernization. So rather than sort of say it's one or the other, it really is a decision that a CIO makes, and agencies that are looking at their customers, their application set, and the state of their current infrastructure, and how much you want to bring forward. Alan, did you want to turn to Sean Brune at all to shed any light on this question?
I did. Sean, I believe, is on the call and indicated he would sit in. I had very positive exchanges with him previously. Sean, would you be willing to address the group in terms of yours or the agency leadership's response to date as you consider our findings and recommendations?
Alan, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. First of all, let me express my appreciation to the panel. And Jim had asked in the chat, I had a couple typos in my response, but the panel's input is greatly appreciated. There is tremendous expertise across the panel, many years of experience in government and in the commercial sector. And certainly the panel has put forward things that we can learn from and benefit in improving our program going forward. Our approach to modernization is in fact business driven. While we started our program focusing on our core mission areas and organizing our work and our roadmap around those core mission areas, each area with its own roadmap, we have added, as was noted, a chief business officer. Kim Baldwin-Sparks and I are partners in this journey together, driving the agency towards a more modern service delivery model. Kim's responsibility also includes being the focal point of improving customer experience. So while her title is Chief Business Officer, she does have responsibility for our customer experience program and our roadmap to improve the customer experience. The one thing I would say is, it's important to get started, and I feel like we're started with some good progress. I appreciate the panel recognizing some of the near-term improvements we have made. Our focus, or the principles that drive our modernization, are customer centricity, service channel parity, and Martha mentioned some of these things. That, the public we serve the whole public. They have to be able to access service in a manner that meets their needs. We do want to move towards more proactive and event-driven communication with the public. That is part of our future service model. And that does relate to modernizing how we access our legacy data. Data is one of our core cross-cutting capabilities that we're modernizing. With regard to the specific question on cloud deployment, as Dan suggested, the agency has adopted a hybrid cloud approach. We do use, as Rennie mentioned, a private cloud, and we make decisions on application deployment very similar to the best practice that Dan outlined. Alan, I appreciate your openness to ongoing dialogue. We had a great conversation last week about how the agency is using the report, and we will continue to make adjustments to improve our execution and really define a customer-centric model of service that we can articulate and engage stakeholders to make a reality. Thank you, Alan.
Well, thank you, Sean. And I again, I want to thank you and all of your colleagues, not only in the CIO shop, but throughout the agency, who made time to speak with us. I know they're all balancing incredible workloads and great responsibilities. So again, we thank you for your time and your responsiveness. We do have one question from an anonymous attendee that asks, based on previous SSAB reports, field offices lack consistency in operations, and that sometimes causes challenges when one seeks to work with the agency in getting information or responses. While we did speak to a number of field and district and regional staff, this wasn't the focus of our report. So I would perhaps ask Kim or Nancy, or maybe Diane or Claire from the SSAB staff, if there's anything that they could speak to in terms of the findings of previous studies on this matter.
I would just say that the board continues to focus very strongly on service delivery. And I think that responsiveness question is a key question in terms of making evidence-based decisions on, what are those customer needs and how is SSA being responsive to those customer needs. And I'm sure, Martha, that may have been a little bit of what you were maybe a part of the customer experience in terms of the agency being a little bit more accountable for its accuracy and responsiveness in response to customers.
Yeah, and I think that there have been some things happening with they're implementing some new technologies that will give them more insights into a lot of these questions around responsiveness and exactly what experience people are having.
Alan, this is Rennie, if I can add for a moment about the process challenge. I think it's important to recognize that Social Security has 1,200 offices around the country. They vary in size. I started in the Midtown Manhattan, which was the largest district office at the time, but you can have some very small district offices like in Plattsburgh, New York, with just a handful of people. Their processes are going to differ if on sheer size and numbers of people alone. What cannot differ is the interpretation of the law and the making sure that every beneficiary is treated correctly, every recipient is treated correctly, their benefits amount are correct, they're treated with courtesy and respect. But there will be differences in processes when you're running an office that has 120 people in it versus an office that has 3 or 4.
Well, thank you, Rennie. I visited that office and I've seen the statue to you that is present down in the lobby that Rennie DiPatima began his distinguished career here.
Actually, it was Christopher Columbus you were looking at, but
You Italians look all alike to me.
that's what I thought.
All right. Are there, okay. I was going to ask, did the panel review the survey methods used to measure customer satisfaction? I don't believe that we did so, but I'll turn to our CX expert, Martha Doris, to get her response.
We did not review the survey methods. I know that they use a couple different techniques in pockets, but almost without exception, we didn't hear a lot about the feedback that they got or that they used. There are new requirements within Section 280 of A11, which have now been changed a little bit, but that have questions and that people are supposed to be using, but we did not actually review those survey questions.
Well, but I think the key thing, and you may have touched on this, Martha, I had to step out for just a moment for another call, but the SSA, as Sean noted, has already begun to step out on some of the recommendations we've made. They've engaged a contractor to help them obtain better and more varied citizen input, customer data. They've met with some other agencies like the Department of Veterans Affairs that stepped out earlier on this area. They're using social media information as a source now, and we've made a connection between some of the leadership there with organizations like the AARP, who gather considerable information through their own surveys. So I would not so much focus on survey design issues and questions in the past. I would look at a new interest and focus on getting that input from varied sources, and how they're going to use it in the future. And the discussions on that have been most promising.
Alan,
Yeah,
as background, Social Security conducts two types of customer surveys. They do a customer survey of people who have called into the 800 number. They take a random survey of people who have called over a 4-week period. They also do a same type of random survey of people who conducted their business with SSA by mail or online. And those people are, again, a random survey. They're contacted for customer satisfaction. I'm speaking to process and not outcomes, but they do conduct two types of customer surveys.
Useful. Thank you for that perspective, Rennie.
One last thing. I think the future is really not in conducting isolated surveys channel by channel. The future is around getting pulses from all the different touch points across organizations and being able to create those into actionable insights to people who can take action. So the government is moving into, and the private sector, into a different way of collecting the feedback from all of these touch points, including how do you take the recordings from your calls and actually pull sentiment analysis out of it? How do you scrape social media and bring all of that together to make better decisions as an agency about customers? So some of this is talking about how it should have been done a long time ago, not how the future should be.
Yeah, Martha, I think that points to understand that holistic journey, the holistic experience that citizens have, not just what are they doing, but what are they thinking, what are they feeling as they're interacting with the government that is there to serve them.
And this speaks, I think, to in part to a question that just came in from Byron Haskins. He asked whether interaction with components of VA, Department of Defense, and Health and Human Services on common issues in healthcare and customer service data sharing part of the scope of your investigation. I touched on this briefly earlier. The connection has already been made between SSA and Veterans Affairs. I think there's additional information, as we've seen across government already in this new administration, efforts to create citizen service customer experience officers. The Internal Revenue Service was one of the first ones highlighted in a recent report. So I think, as Greg just touched on, hopefully we'll see a more holistic approach as opposed to a agency by agency stovepipe response in terms of how citizens get service and responses from government across their needs as opposed to individual agencies. Martha, would you like to speak to that as well? I see you poised.
I was just, I was just going to say that, you know, citizens don't experience like an agency. They experience a life event. And many times when they experience a life event, it crosses multiple agencies. This is definitely an area that government-wide needs a lot of work. So I think that we will see that there has been the beginnings of journey maps around some of these cross-agency journeys that will lead to, you know, more implementation of different things across the agencies. But right now, I mean, Mark, you could probably talk to this a little bit. This goes way back to some of the Quicksilver days and trying to, you know, service people who were, you know, survivors of disasters or want to get benefits, or you have events in your life, marriages, divorces, deaths. I've heard horror stories lately about people who died in their family and just trying to figure out how to get to the people across government that you need to. So this is definitely not just applies to SSA. This is a government-wide issue.
And it really does get to the question of where does SSA fit in these various work streams or business concepts. I think in the area of disability, the notion that a citizen who's facing a disability or their agent has to go through multiple state, local, VA programs and get sent to multiple doctors, all creating health records to justify benefits claims process is way outdated. And we did talk about that in the report. It's kind of the heart of how these processes, data, and flows need to be integrated across stakeholders.
Hey, Alan, this
I
is
just agree. I mean, this is something we did talk about, because you think about just what Martha just said, and Mark and Greg is right on. Now, if you're a citizen, you know, you may deal with IRS, VA, CMS, and SSA. And I actually had the experience of dealing with both SSA and Medicare during this process, and there wasn't a good handoff, honestly. And I think we talked about the new administration hopefully reigniting what I think Mark led in the past, is trying to look at all of these agencies, look at the common pain points and best practices on citizen-facing services. I think this is needed.
Alan, this is Sean. I just want to make one more point relative to the dialogue on the citizen experience interacting with at least the federal executive branch government. SSA is an active participant and contributor to cross-agency work coordinated by the Office of Management and Budget, particularly on the line of work that Mark mentioned, the disability experience. We, prior to our modernization program, had in fact developed journey maps for our core business at SSA. We have engaged to contribute input to similar journey maps for the executive branch, cross-agency. We do have many data sharing agreements across government, which help enable our core mission. And one of the tangible ways through our modernization program that we've tried to improve the experience for the customer is through our ability to accept credentials for online transactions issued by other government agencies, so that one credential, username, password, for example, could be used at multiple agencies, and you can conduct business at My Social Security, our online portal for secure, personalized transactions using that credential. We're in the process of onboarding with login.gov, GSA government-wide credential, and we do this in addition to our maintenance of our own authentication capability. Thank you, Alan.
No, thank you, Sean, and I appreciate that input. And if I could prevail on you, and others can speak to this, but I think you're the best one to address it. We focused a lot on getting input from citizens and customers, knowing how we're doing, but there's still the issue then, and this is in response to a question from another anonymous attendee. When there are issues that arise across the board or in individual cases about responsiveness, accountability, timeliness, when you want to escalate the issue, how does that happen within the agency? So to go back to the question that Jim raised in his personal situation, how does that get escalated and addressed as opposed to just knowing across the board how generally we're doing overall? Can you speak to that? I know it's a little bit outside your area, but I know you have experience on the business side of the house and the agency.
Yes, and certainly Jim is correct. We can improve our coordination, particularly with Medicare. I will tell you it's an area of focus for us. We have a senior agency leader that's the liaison with Medicare and try to coordinate our service planning and service improvements, not just automated service, but all communication, pamphlets, et cetera, website content, so that we move in unison and provide a better customer experience. When issues are encountered, Alan, as you pointed out, generally they get resolved at the individual level. On our end, it's field office or 800 number service. But when we see a trend, we have a process in place to establish what we would call a tiger team, where we say, hey, this has happened several times. Is there a business process flaw? Is there a change that occurred that is the root cause of this error in service? And let's address the root cause together. So that's just our working protocol with Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. But we have similar protocols in place with VA and Department of Labor and other executive branch agencies.
All right, Kim, I think there were some other questions or issues that you were wanted to address, either from the board's experience or from some of the questions that you're seeing. Could I turn back to you and see if there's anything that remains open?
Sure. One question that was dismissed accidentally to the panel was interaction with components of VA, DOD, and DHHS on common issues in healthcare and customer service data sharing part of the scope of your investigation?
I think we did speak to that. I did address that.
Okay.
As I said, that just to repeat in case it was missed, the agency, VA has been in the lead in this area. There have been discussions between SSA and VA now. The incoming administration has moved to appoint customer experience officers in other agencies across government, IRS being a prime example. I think Martha addressed that now we're looking at focusing on your life experience regardless of the agency, so one doesn't get stovepipe responses, but can address an issue that might span VA, CMS, and HHS, SSA, et cetera. So again, I think there's positive movement in that direction.
Okay, great. Another question that I had is, as I've spent a lot of years at SSA, a lot of years on the Hill, and clearly, what we've seen in terms of changes of administration, people are in and out, mission statements, or not mission statements, maybe so much, but strategic plans gets changed. People have different focuses and so forth. And I'm just wondering from your experiences, either you, Alan, or folks from the panel, what are some, how do we ensure that, as SSA works to better define how, people, process, and technology better work together to improve the customer experience? How do we ensure that the appropriations process on the Hill is supportive, that the leadership, the administration is supportive coming in, or in the panel's experience, as SSA does better, they may not be challenged to make changes? Just what's your sense of all of that?
Rennie, I think you may have the best perspective on this issue. Could I ask you to begin?
Well, Alan, I wish I could. I'm not sure I understand, Kim, the precise point or question that you're asking about.
No problem. Just maybe stated more simply, how does SSA bring the appropriations, the appropriators along, a new administration along, with its efforts to, better integrate process, people, technology to improve customer service? How do they stop the appropriations process and the new administration from, maybe interfering as much in all, not that they would interfere, but in their effort, of course, to make things better? Because I've seen SSA just kind of almost be like a pinball in a pinball machine, just bouncing off of everybody's direction.
Yeah, I can start the conversation. Perhaps my colleagues can jump in as well.
Nani wants to jump in after you finish, Rennie.
And she probably has a even better perspective than me. While I was at SSA, we spent a lot of time, more than maybe we needed to, up on the Hill. The Social Security Subcommittee of the House Ways and Means Committee, as you know, Kim, is the authoritative House body when it comes to providing budgets to Social Security. And our legislative, the SSAs, I have to keep on repeating ours because it's in my blood. The SSA's legislative and policy people spend a lot of time interacting with the folks on the Hill, particularly with the Subcommittee on Social Security of the House Ways and Means Committee, but also with the government ops, and on the Senate side with the Senate Finance Committee, who have over the years, since the beginning of Social Security, and since they've been committees, have been the most interested in what's going on with Social Security. And it's through those committees that SSA makes its case about the funding, the administrative funding that it needs. And of course, you can't have those discussions without staffers, and particularly staffers, but also congresspeople themselves, having some interest and some opinion about, from perhaps their own district's experience, about what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. So let me start there and ask Nan if she would jump in and probably would focus on it better than I can.
I cannot focus on it better than Rennie can, but Nani here just wanted to say, just from experience at a couple of different agencies, my recommendation, I cannot stress enough the level of effort needed to really streamline your strategic plan, communication, budget, and actually tie all those things together to the customer experience and some of the elements that we talk about in the report. Clear communication, in addition to setting some real metrics on how you are going to measure success, can help when all parts of the agency are saying those things in the same way with the same voice, can really help kind of cut through a lot of the sort of spiraling or ping-ponging, as you mentioned, Kim, and all agencies have an element of that. You know, today the flavor of the day is this, and the flavor of the day is that tomorrow. That's okay. To be agile also means to be able to fit in what you need to do into whatever train is moving, whether that's a budget train, a strategic planning train, or some kind of IT modernization play. You have to align all those things and keep them together in order to cut through and start to be really responsive to what people want, need, and need to hear from Social Security Agency about. And that, I think, can go a long way, both to driving the project forward and getting it funded.
Alan, do you mind if I add to this? Because I just want to echo what Nani has said. You know, when we talked about the governance infrastructure, that's making sure that everything is in sync. All those gears move, and a change in direction can come from anywhere. It can come from Hill, it can come from a cyber crisis, anything, a customer experience feedback. And I think having all of those, the communication strategies, the stakeholder engagement, but all of the processes from the business architecture, the technical architecture, all of that being in sync. Then when a change comes, then the gears move and everything moves in sync, and you're able to pivot and adapt to these kind of changes that will come. But it also allows you to stay on track when all these things are interlinked.
Yeah, if I could just make a final point on this particular question. I think it's important to recognize that often the Hill is as stovepiped and sometimes traditional and hidebound in its ways as we often criticize the executive branch to be. So we touched upon multiple oversight, authorizing, and appropriating committees that play a role in dealing with an agency. But I also know the experience of trying to go up to the Hill, and to some extent with the Office of Management and Budget as well, and say, we want to present these things in a different way to focus on our strategy, how they're being received and perceived by the customer, and some of these new and different ways of presenting and looking at and reviewing our budgets. And I've had the experience then of them saying, thank you, this is very interesting, but can you please submit it in the traditional way? So I think change needs to occur kind of across the board to be successful, not only down on the executive branch level, but up on the Hill as well. We're getting toward the end, and I want to be sure we deal with any final questions. So we have one more, and it's a follow-up. Did the panel offer any insight into modernizing the cross-agency data sharing, such as between CMS and SSA, and how this might be affected? I think we've answered that a little bit, and Sean just spoke to it in terms of a broader outreach, especially with CMS and HHS. Sean, is there anything you'd want to add to what you said earlier in response to this question? I think it's really focused around modernizing the data sharing effort.
Alan, the only thing I would add is SSA has actually been a leader in the cross-agency data exchange community of practice. We have driven topics that are presented and discussed across the executive branch. We just hired, brought on board a new chief data officer. He has experience at multiple agencies, and he will continue to drive us forward. But we have we're in the process of updating our enterprise data strategy, where consumers and interested parties, stakeholders to the data strategies offered by other executive branch agencies. Just earlier this week, I circulated the recent publication from the Department of Education. We are certainly through the Chief Data Officers Network, through the CIO Council, and through the Chief Technology Officer Network, engaged in finding solutions to data exchange challenges. This is a partnership not only on business and IT, but also on legal and policy. It's really a cross-agency, cross-discipline effort, but we're making progress.
All right, thanks for that. And actually, I thanks for raising the point about the chief data officer. I should have mentioned that earlier in terms of one of the positive steps that has been taken. That person came to you from, was it DHS? Is that correct?
That's correct, Alan, yes.
Okay, and sorry, somebody was about to speak, and
Alan,
Yeah.
I think as Greg, this is Rennie, as Greg Giddens has pointed out, there is a difference between data sharing and integration. And I had written a little chat note that pointed out that Social Security shares with a large number of agencies, sometimes every night, OPM, IRS, VA. But that data sharing occurs by sharing with them records and files in the formats they want. We cannot yet do integration of services because all of our data, including client identity data, is different. They're defined differently and they're called different things. So we need to make sure we understand as we do this journey towards modernization, that there is a difference between data sharing, which is done every night, and process integration.
And if I could just add to that, I think there's also a difference between data sharing and data collection. And the biggest change that we did look at in the report is the fact that a lot of this data is already being collected by stakeholders or partners multiple times. So a lot of what has to be done here is not the decision that we collect data and we can share it, but who is going to be the key collection point and who integrates other agencies or organizations' data into their workflow. And I think we highlighted that several parts, several ways to integrate with the customer journey and the journey maps in the report.
And Alan, I would just add what Mark just said, and I think Sean talked about it earlier, is looking at just SSA and CMS, looking at the customer journey and where they do interact and where there should be some sort of process integration. And then look at the data harmonization after that, or that comes with that.
All right, I think I see one final question. Although I think we may have spoken to this just now, is data integration an ultimate goal? Is it possible for SSA, OPM, IRS to standardize their data? I think, Rennie, to some extent, you've already spoken to to that. And Sean,
Can I just add one point on that?
yes, please, Dan.
Back to a question earlier about sort of the integration of architecture with this, which is that the new technologies are enabling data sharing across organizations in ways that we really couldn't have dreamed about 10 or 15 years ago. And those technologies will continue to involve sort of intelligent automation type technologies that SSA can bring in and other agencies can bring in. And Rennie's absolutely correct. It's very difficult to bring agencies together, as all of us have lived through, to try to come up with common data standards. And so a lot of what the commercial world is moving toward is, can we create distributed analytics technologies that can really bring this together in a similar way that makes it a little easier for agencies to work together. So that might be a sort of a longer term aspiration.
Okay, and with that, and we're down toward the end, and there are no questions in the queue, and I'm caught up on all the chat. I'm going to turn it back to Kim to close us out, but with once more thanking her and the board for commissioning this IT panel. I really have rarely had the chance to work with such a wonderful and talented and good group of people. So I am most grateful to all the members, Mark, Jim, Greg, Rennie, Martha, Dan, Dave, and Bill Eggers, who couldn't join us. So thank you to all of you. Thanks to Kim and the board. And Kim, I'll turn it to you. Turn it back to you for any final remarks.
The only thing I'd like to just add is thank you all. Thank you to our panelists for your hard work. Thank you for your efforts today. I thank you for our attendees to join us and your questions. We really appreciate all of your efforts, and we wish everyone a wonderful day.
And get ready. Head out to the store to stock up on toilet paper, milk, and stuff as the snows come into Washington, D.C.
That's right.
All right. All the best to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Right.